Welcome to Voice Rising with Kara Johnstad. Enjoy weekly conversations with leading luminaries, pioneering visionaries, singers, poets, musicians, and sound healers as we explore the profound role our voice plays on the path to self-realization and global enlightenment. The internationally acclaimed singer, composer, author, healer, recording artist, voice expert, creator of Voice Your Essence, and founder of the School of Voice, Kara Johnstad uses her extraordinary spiritual gifts to empower others. Everything in this world vibrates. Everything has a frequency. A pioneer in the field of voice work and transformational songwriting. Her breakthrough methods are helping thousands of people worldwide fine-tune their body-mind-spirit system and unlock the energetic frequencies of limitless creativity, health, and abundance. Share your voice, ask your questions, join in the conversation. Receive life-changing, positive transformation and rise together to create a sound world. And here's your host, Kara Johnstad.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show today. It's all about becoming a finely tuned instrument of pulsating, vibrant consciousness. And I am delighted to have with me the celebrated author, Shelli Reneé Joye. And welcome, Shelli, to the show today. Happy Valentine's.
Happy Valentine's Day to you and the audience.
Shelli, you have a new book out. It must feel just amazing to have it finally out on the market. It's called Tantric Psychophysics, a structural map of altered states and the dynamics of consciousness. And this book presents a wide variety of traditional and contemporary material that helps seekers and explorers of consciousness discover specific methods to tune and direct consciousness. So in these crazy evolutionary times, which, so much is shifting for us, how does this book help us to become an instrument of love and joy, which is already in your name, right? And what drew you to write such a masterpiece of a book?
Well, wow, it's I have to go back to, I guess, the very beginning. I've recently sort of been coming out of the closet as a transgender woman. Mm-hmm. The last 20 years, I've been Shelli. My first years, very early on, I knew I was female, but my parents were not convinced. So I threw myself, like many of us, into focusing on studying and learning, and I actually wanted to study science. Maybe I thought that would solve my problem.
Yeah.
I got very interested in science fiction, too, and I was also quite religious. I was a Catholic, and I thought of praying to God, maybe God would fix me if I was really good. So I did all those things, and I ended up doing quite well in school because I spent all my time studying pretty much to keep my mind off other things. And I studied physics at first, and I ended up studying electrical engineering because I was really interested in communication. And the electrical engineering I took dealt a lot with modulating electromagnetic waves, radio waves, and microwaves, and things like that. But I also was still really interested in communication. So when I was 21, I had just gotten married, trying to solve my conundrum, but eventually it didn't work. But we were in love, and we went to California for the summer. And my wife was an artist, and we hung around with some hippies. It was 1967, and I ended up taking LSD on the beach at night, some very strong LSD. I got talked into it. I thought, well, I've been reading Life magazine says people can communicate with God. And I said, well, communication sounds good, and just maybe I will communicate with God. Well, I think I did, but it was wilder than I thought. It was an amazing revelation of consciousness. And I had never really thought of the word consciousness up to that point. It was never really discussed in science classes. Even in psychology, I took some psychology courses, but they were more dealing with human behavior and not pure consciousness. What was it? So I thought, here's an area of study that's really not being looked into by science. And, I asked a few questions in some of my electrical engineering classes, and they'd say, well, that's not something you can ask about here. I think one of the questions was, what if the electricity in our walls, the vibrating electricity running through our buildings, what if it's aware somehow? It's a living thing. All the other students, I was kind of a hippie, the only one in the engineering department. They looked at me and there was silence, and the professor said, no, you can't ask those questions here. Go to a philosophy class or maybe the religion department. Yeah. So that was disappointing. But I did get interested in consciousness as almost a profession. I really got the bug of trying to understand it from the viewpoint of physics and engineering, but also experientially. At the time in the West, there were a lot of from India, Indians coming to teach meditation, Maharishi and Swami Satyananda, and even some Americans, Richard Alpert, who worked with Timothy Leary, went to India and came back as Baba Ram Dass. And I really respected, I've always respected people who had PhDs in science or psychology who get interested in meditation. So I really got interested in meditation and trying to understand the physics of consciousness. I moved to New York City, and where there were a lot of resources, a lot of really great bookstores that had esoteric books. I started my big collection of esoteric books, and I discovered some of the best books were from India. One of them was Patanjali's Sutras, and I got about 10 different copies of it because I found out that it seemed like everyone who translated Patanjali's Sutras, which are about meditation, all the translations seemed different. They'd take one line and they'd have totally. So I thought, I have to learn Sanskrit to really understand this.
Of course.
And I ended up going back to California and enrolling in a master's degree in Indian philosophy and Asian studies. And I did study Sanskrit for a couple of years, enough so where I could translate or try to translate the books from India myself. But it's not enough to just translate the words. You have to experience things. Like the word love. If you were a young person and you have never really fallen in love yet, you read about love, but, it's or a pain. Somebody has a terrible pain. If you've never had a pain, you have to really experience things directly to even begin to understand the words. Yeah. So that's pretty much what happened to me. I finally realized that it would be great to try to translate techniques of meditation and understand them from the viewpoint of science and even engineering, because engineering is one of the areas of science where you try to not only understand how things work in nature, but you try to develop new ways of doing things and doing them better. So I thought there might be ways we could even learn to meditate better if we understood the science underneath it all. Right. So I'll skip 20 or 30 years to where I got my PhD. I got a PhD in consciousness study. In 2016, I finished my doctoral studies, and along the way, I found some science, highly trained scientists who were also interested in consciousness and mysticism. One of them was Teilhard de Chardin, who I've written a lot about. He was a Jesuit priest who was also highly trained in geology and anthropology, and he knew some physics too. Also, Rudolf Steiner. A lot of people have followed Rudolf Steiner, but don't realize he was trained as an engineer. He went to the Vienna Institute of Technology, and so he was very interested in direct experience of what he called hidden worlds, the hidden worlds. And those same hidden worlds are the ones that yogis talk about, and Taoists. They talk about getting in touch with these hidden worlds, these other dimensions. And it dovetails very much into a physicist that I read a lot of and wrote about in my dissertation and some other books, David Bohm. And David Bohm turned out to be a highly influential physicist, quantum physicist. He got really interested in plasmas. And the plasma is an interesting thing. The universe, 98% of the universe is plasma. People don't realize that. They think it's hard material things, but plasma are vibrating energies. They're ions. They're plus or minus ions. They're electromagnetic, three-dimensional or multidimensional fields. You can see them in Hubble telescope pictures of different galaxies. The huge, enormous light years across fields of swirling colored gas, and they're beautiful. But people don't realize our bodies are full of plasma too. In fact, in biology, they call our blood plasma. And it's not a coincidence. Our blood is full of these ions, electromagnetic ions that are coursing through our body. And we actually broadcast vibrations in the infrared. Infrared range, people call it heat. But heat is just how we sense it. We feel something is hot. But the real energy that's coming out of our body is infrared energy. And you can see that if you wear night vision goggles or what they used to call sniper scopes. At dark is what the military uses a lot in order to see human bodies from a distance. In fact, like from a mile away, you can see a human body glowing at night. In the dark, if you look through these devices that translate the infrared radiant energy into visual energy that your eyes can see. And your eyes can only see a small bit of the vibratory spectrum, but the infrared is coursing out of our bodies at the speed of light. And I believe, and there's a growing number of scientists believe, that infrared is a way that we interact and communicate with one another. We also can do that through auditory vibrations. Singing and music are really important. But all of these things are vibrating energy. And the vibrations are what carry information. And so when you tune into an AM or an FM radio station or even on the internet, you listen to music, these are vibrating frequencies, unique patterns of frequencies that your body resonates with. It's called a frequency spectrum that comes from any sound. There's always kind of a unique pattern of energies at different frequencies that come together. If they're coming together harmonically, we call it music. And it really interacts with our consciousness. And everyone has that experience that music interacts with your consciousness. It actually, it's coming from an external source, from another person, maybe from their lips and their throat and their lungs, or an instrument that you're plucking the string of, or vibrating air through the passages of a flute or a horn. But these vibrations also modulate your own vibrations in your own consciousness, in your own body, in your blood. In fact, some mystics talk about the trilling in the blood. And there's a growing body of researchers in consciousness that think that consciousness may not only be in the neurons and our electromagnetic, the nerves in our body, but it may be coursing through our bloodstream, trilling in our blood, because our blood is actually the carrier of the infrared energy. And we have like 20,000 miles of capillaries in our body through which this blood plasma, this charged electromagnetic energy, ions of blood are coursing, and perhaps that's where the real consciousness is, and that the nerves of our brain act more like a laptop computer. It might not really be the source of consciousness, whereas heat, or infrared, may be the real center of consciousness. And according to the mystics and saints and a growing body of consciousness researchers, heat has a lot to do with consciousness. And getting back to my most recent book, Tantric Psychophysics, I have to say that Tantra is a word that in the West is often misconstrued as the yoga of sex. Mm-hmm. It's much more than the yoga of sex. It's the yoga of all kinds of things that has to do with vibrations and consciousness. It has to do with kirtan, which is like mantra, like chanting, and all of these things affect your awareness. But sex is something that even people who know nothing about, or maybe have no interest in mysticism or meditation or even religion, sex is a universal experience. Otherwise, none of us would be here if we were all a product of the sexual experience, which is people, when they have sex, they get hot. And I mean, you know, in more ways than one, they become warm. And their bodies are partly joined within each other, and there's this flow of infrared energy, which is heat, which warms them up, and mystics believe that they're able to then bridge the gap between our space-time world and other dimensions. And the other dimensions is talked about by the physicist David Bohm. He calls them the implicate order. Mm-hmm. That we live in 4 dimensions normally, space and time. And time is one dimension, you know, and space has 3 dimensions, X, Y, and Z. If you look at it geometrically, you have, you know, X, Y, and Z pointing at 90 degrees to one another. That's space. So there's 4 dimensions in space-time. But according to modern physics, string theory and M theory, there are at least 11 dimensions and maybe more. And they came upon this by applying mathematics to the data that comes from colliders, these huge particle accelerators, cyclotrons and the linear hadron accelerator. Certain particles, quantum particles, would pop off at 90 degrees to the other ones, and they couldn't account for this using normal mathematics. They had to account for this by coming up with additional dimensions. So what if there are 7 additional dimensions that physicists believe there are? I mean, and what are they? And they're beyond space and time. Well, scientists sometimes give them, you know, they think it's a joke, but they call them charm or love or empathy. We could actually be communicating with these other dimensions. And, of course, the mystics say we can. Rudolf Steiner, for instance, said he called them other worlds. But they're actually thought to be, by many, many religions and many cultures, as there's a reality. Like you might call it heaven or God. David Bohm called it the implicate order. And I think religions would call it God, that there's one reality to the universe. And that reality is one single self. You know, the universe can't be 2. It can't be divided into separate things. Most philosophers have agreed that it's one universe, one single story, the universe. And there's Carl Jung, the great psychologist, said there is one self with a capital S. He said there's one giant self beyond space and time, but also includes space and time. And each one of us is like a tiny self with a lowercase s. So there's billions of smaller selves, and they're just refracted individual separate viewpoints of the one big self. So who we really are, we're really connected to that one self. And mysticism and meditation and Tantra provide techniques by which we can actually connect to that one self. And obviously, starting out with sex, anybody can, during the sex act, they connect to that one self. It's like they call it bliss, and I mean, I don't even have to describe it because I think almost everyone in the audience probably has experienced it. But it's something you can't put in words. It's just an intense feeling. And that same intense feeling is what tantrics seek in their practices. So it's not just the act of sex, but mantra and meditation, very deep meditation. Unlike in many religions, especially the religions in the last 100 years or so, which were very influenced by Puritanism, the actual use of drugs is very important to tantrics because drugs work. In fact, the essence of Tantra is a tantric, traditional in India, they would use anything that works, anything that pragmatically they found that would work to get you to other states of awareness, deeper, richer states of consciousness. And they found that these things work well, like in caves. A lot of you hear about yogis meditating in caves, in very quiet, dark places. I myself have been practicing meditation for about 50 years now, not constantly, but for 30 minutes a day, roughly. I actually have set a timer for 30 minutes, so I do it at least 30 minutes. But the key is to find a quiet, dark place and where you can practice your prayer and meditation. And why I say prayer, I think prayer is really useful, especially if you have a childhood tradition of prayer. You've inherited a religion from your ancestors, that it helps quiet your mind, and the prayer takes you away from your normal, everyday monkey mind consciousness where you're thinking about, projects you're working on, or what's for dinner, or did that person offend me, or am I sad or happy? You need to, the essence of meditation is practicing to let go of those things, to suspend them, but not to fall asleep like you normally do at night. It works to fall asleep and you go into the dream state and you connect to other dimensions, but usually you can't remember what happened, and you don't have much control. Whereas in meditation, you get in a very quiet, dark place. I use earplugs, especially if I'm in a city or traveling. These little tiny rubber earplugs work pretty well. And if I were traveling in a hotel room, I would probably close the windows and turn off the lights and meditate. Or even the bathroom is a pretty good place. Usually they don't have windows and they're quiet. So the trick is to quiet down your normal, everyday monkey mind and begin to listen. You just listen. And many meditators and religions have talked about the importance of just being quiet and listening, and then things will start to rise up in your awareness. And these things are coming from other dimensions. Even on the planet Earth, they might be coming from what Teilhard de Chardin calls the noosphere. He believed there's a collective consciousness on the planet Earth that he called the noosphere. It's where people's awareness go when they die, and it becomes a big collective awareness of like a sort of a tribal human awareness. And it's a very specific frequency range. And he thought there were different plants and animals have their own unique frequency range on the planet Earth. And I have to say, a few years ago, I worked with ayahuasca for a time. I only had 4 or 5 experiences, but the unique thing about ayahuasca, as compared to the LSD and the psilocybin I took when I was much younger, ayahuasca seemed to open you up to the network of consciousness on the planet Earth, sort of the ecology of the planet. Although it seemed to be predominantly a sense of sort of a vine thing, you feel like you're connected to a vine of awareness. It's like an internet as opposed to the internet. So I would say meditation and ayahuasca would lead you to connecting with the living consciousness of the planet Earth, not just the human noosphere that Teilhard talked about, but connecting you to the plants and animals of our ecological, the living ecology of the Earth.
And that was quite an experience. And I also felt that it was a healing experience because unlike some of the other entheogenic drugs I tried, I wasn't tired after taking ayahuasca. For a week or two, I felt energized, and they call it plant medicine. And I always wondered why they called it plant medicine, because I never felt like I was ill or sick. But when I took the ayahuasca, it was like I felt that I was vibrating at a different level, a different frequency level, able to vibrate along with the living surface of the earth. And there was a certain communication going on. And it was looking into every nook and cranny of my biological body and tuning it up. It was like I was getting tuned up by resonating with the living essence of biological consciousness on the planet Earth. So that's my little take on ayahuasca. In fact, I also feel, and it might be kind of, I'm sure a lot of people would be upset with the idea, but I really believe if high school students would be introduced to something like ayahuasca or some entheogen, in a controlled, supervised way, just open them up to the dimensions of consciousness that they live within and that is within them, they would see that there's much more than just, computer games and going to dances and the everyday struggle of our society, that there's a much richer meaning to life, and there's more going on in the universe than the cosmos. They would see right away that the whole universe is live. It's not dead. Sadly, the scientists tend to think that the universe is dead, and I myself think that even minerals and stones are not dead. They're actually vibrating energy, and that vibrating energy is consciousness, and it's reaching out and touching every other bit of consciousness. It actually is supported by the idea of the hologram. The hologram and holonomic theories are that everything is interconnected, and you can take a small part of things and find out that it's connected to everything else in the whole universe.
Shelli,
it's kind of abstract. I do talk about it to some extent in my book on Tantric Psychophysics.
You do, and it's so beautiful that it reminds me when I was starting this interview, the original word, the origins of the word engineer come from ingenium. I don't know if you don't know that, and it's really someone who solves problems that elude normal people. And with your rich history, one can really sense that you are weaving together many worlds. We're going to take a very short break for our sponsors, and we're going to be back in a couple minutes with Shelli Reneé Joye.
The cutting edge of conscious radio, OMTimes Radio, IOM FM.
OMTimes magazine is one of the leading online content providers of positivity, wellness, and personal empowerment. A philanthropic organization, their net proceeds are funneled to support worldwide charity initiatives via Humanity Healing International. Through their commitment to creating community and providing conscious content, they aspire to uplift humanity on a global scale. Connect at omtimes.com. OMTimes, creating a more conscious lifestyle.
With happy clients all over the world, Kara Johnstad knows that your voice is the missing link to more authenticity, abundance, creativity, and health. An internationally acclaimed voice expert, Kara's breakthrough methods have helped thousands of people successfully heal their voice wounds and extinguish the story of self-doubt and shyness forever. Join in group trainings, attend online sessions, schedule one-on-one time, and invite Kara to work with your organization and community. Get started today. Go to www.karajohnstad.com and receive a special guided meditation designed to fine-tune your inner voice and welcome you on the voice journey.
This is Kathy Beal, host of Celestial Compass, featuring astrology you can use. Celestial Compass points you to what's going on in the sky and what you can do with it down here on Earth. We also explore fun, effective, and cosmic tools for navigating this adventure we call life. Join me the first and third Monday of the month at 5 p.m. Eastern Time for Celestial Compass. It's enlightening, entertaining, and empowering.
Coping-19, brought to you by CDC and the Ad Council.
If you're feeling increasingly lonely right now, you're not alone. It's totally normal. Even though we may not be able to get together in person, connecting virtually with friends and family still gives you a chance to interact with people and may help raise your spirits. Join a virtual book club, set up group text chats, or online video coffee breaks with coworkers.
Find more self-care and coping tips at coping-19.org.
Welcome back to Voice Rising. I'm your host, Kara Johnstad, and with me today in the studio to talk about his new book, Tantric Psychophysics, a structural map of altered states and the dynamics of consciousness, is the author, Shelli Reneé Joye. Shelli, you are really weaving us through so many beautiful areas of your own life that you've touched on, from meditation to ayahuasca, plant medicine, to Tantra, engineering, physics. Let's talk about a little bit about sound. You were talking about the French priest Teilhard de Chardin, and he has this wonderful quote, which I think is perfect for today, which is, "Someday, after mastering the winds, the waves, the tides, and gravity, we shall harness for God the energies of love. And then for a second time in the history of world, man will have discovered fire," which comes back to your infrared consciousness connection, right? And in your book, you also have this wonderful quote that said that Teilhard attained to and I'm quoting from your book, "a new sense in the very perception of being, a hidden power stirring in the heart of matter, a glowing center. As far as I understand it," he gives the name to this glowing center, the divine milieu, and characterizing it as a sound, a single note, an ineffably simple vibration. And this is what really fascinates me as a composer and as a singer and as somebody who's meditated for so long, that so many traditions have brought us all back to this vibrating frequency and this a tone at one moment, right? This simple vibration. What is your experience with when you dive deeply into meditation? Do you hear, when you have your earplugs in, this inner sound coming from your cells?
Well, yes, that's it's a major element of my practice of contemplation, and it began. It actually has a beginning. Back when I think I was about 25 or 26, I lived on the Lower East Side in New York City, on a fifth floor walk up, and it was pretty quiet late at night. So I hadn't discovered earplugs yet, so I would meditate like 10 or 11, after the bongos on the street stopped playing, and people calmed down a bit, and it was fairly quiet in an inner room. So I would practice Hatha Yoga. I had really gotten into practicing the physical exercises of Hatha Yoga. And part of Hatha Yoga is doing an asana, a pose, and trying at the same time to meditate. In other words, trying to quiet down your mind, what they call the monkey mind, the talking in words, and your memory, trying to attenuate your memory, getting really quiet and listening. As I mentioned before, listening is really important. In fact, I'm a Benedictine oblate. I go to a monastery sometimes as an oblate. That's sort of what they call a tertiary. I I took vows to meditate every day, which was easy because I did it anyway, pretty much.
Yeah.
In the Christian tradition, although I'm pretty ecumenical, I'm sort of a Catholic, Hindu, Taoist, I suppose. You know, I look at all religions as different flowers, and why would you pick a single flower and say that's the best, you know? But there are people who think roses are the best. But anyway, to get back to the sound thing, I was doing a shoulder stand, and I was being very quiet and listening, and suddenly there was a very distinct, loud, it sounded like a single frequency sound, a tone, a very high-pitched tone, seemed to be over in the right part of my brain, kind of toward the front. And it scared me and surprised me. It scared me because I thought, oh my God, am I getting an aneurysm? Am I destroying my brain? But I didn't panic. I found it very interesting. You know, from my training in science, I wanted to just observe it and see what happened. So I focused on it, and it seemed to get a little bit louder, to my surprise. And every time I was able to focus on it and be really quiet, it got a little bit louder. And then I heard a very similar tone, although they're not the same frequency, in another part of my brain. I was really surprised because I had never really thought of trying to feel different locations within my brain before, but there were like two different little tones in different places. So I got out of the shoulder stand and was just lying there and listening to these very subtle, I would call them subtle because they weren't external, they were internal frequencies. And that night I actually heard a lot of them, and I tried to go to sleep. I actually got a fever. I woke up with being in sweat. Luckily I woke up and I didn't hear them anymore. So I thought, well, thank God maybe I didn't have an aneurysm, but I need to find out what these things are. I wonder if there's anything in the yoga tradition, the Tantra tradition, that talks about them. So I went to a nearby bookstore, a really good bookstore in the Lower East Side, where I first found my books on Teilhard de Chardin and a lot of yoga books. And I finally managed to find a book called Sarvachan, The Yoga of the Inner Sounds. I thought, oh my God, this is it. Maybe I should really follow this yoga. And I actually did. I collected over the years some books from different traditions. The Sikhs tradition in India, they're the group that wear turbans a lot and let their hair grow, and they have a tradition of listening to the inner sounds, and they call it Vak or Shabda. And I was really excited to have stumbled upon, just by accident, yoga of the inner sounds. I actually bought a little device that we used to have in our engineering labs it's called a sound oscillator. You can set it to different frequencies, and I would try to listen to the inner sound and then turn on the device and hear it to see if I could figure out what the frequency was, you know, because I was trying to do research on it in my own way. But the inner sound frequencies seem to be higher in frequency, very subtle. I mean, you can read books on yoga, and they talk about the subtle inner sounds, and I understood why, because they're not sounds you hear in the everyday world very clearly, but they are high-pitched tones. And so that became an object of my practice, and over the years I discovered that if you focus your awareness on different areas within your body, you can actually develop and begin to hear different subtle tones. In fact, if you focus on your heart, and many religions have, especially in India, the Tantrics and in Tibet, but also in Christianity, there's the Sacred Heart of Jesus, for instance. People would try to be aware of their heart, actually trying to become very quiet and contemplate on the center of their heart or the center of their chest. and listen and try to feel something. Well, it's not only feeling, it's hearing these very, very high frequency, very low individual sounds. And we have, according to some traditions in India, 7 or 8 chakras. These chakras are probably many of your audience have heard about them, but they're centers, plexuses within your body, where if you look at them with a book from physiology, I got several really good medical physiology books when I was exploring this. There are areas that not only are said to be full of psychic energy somehow, and you can develop them, and they'll start to bloom like a flower, depending on how much you're able to focus on them in a regular way during your days and months of meditation. They're actually full of blood, a lot of capillaries, and also the endocrine system, your endocrinological system that generates different chemicals to regulate different parts of your systems in your body. These they're very rich in blood supply and endocrine glands. And by focusing on them, when my son was doing a science fair project once, we got some biofeedback. He got very interested in biofeedback. So we got a device you can hook up to your finger, and it measures the temperature. And you put it on your fingertip, and you try to focus and your awareness on your fingertip, and you can eventually you get to the point where the temperature starts to rise. You can actually see it go up several degrees in temperature just by focusing on it, by trying to feel your fingertip. Well, what happens physiologically is the capillaries, when you're focusing on them, your nerves connected to those capillaries cause the capillaries to dilate, to widen slightly, and so more blood flows through them, and they warm up. More infrared energy is flowing through them. Not only does the blood flow through them more, but they become more sensitive because the nerves in those areas are getting more blood. And so it's all quite physiological, and that's part of what I call psychophysics in my new book. That part of the title is Tantric Psychophysics. It's explaining how some of these experiences during meditation, how they correlate with physiology and biology and physics, how they might really work. So over the years, I developed practiced Shabda yoga, practicing listening for the inner sounds and trying to develop them by focusing on different areas, and by focusing on, say, your abdomen. There's a chakra down there in your abdomen, behind your belly button, so-called. By focusing there, of course, the capillaries dilate and it gets more warm, and you start to feel a vibration there. And that's the big thing in Taoism, I discovered. The Taoists focus on their belly, and they focus long enough till they start to feel a vibration. Now, they don't talk much about hearing the sound, but they talk about sensing a vibration in the chi down there. And also in martial arts of kendo and judo and jiu-jitsu, the samurais used to focus on their belly for the same reason. But anyway, I'll cut forward to like 2 years ago at the beginning of the pandemic. For years I'd been trying to cultivate these sounds, trying to make the sounds get louder and richer, hearing more sounds. And it was slowly happening. I was, able to, within a few minutes of meditating, hear different frequencies in my different parts of my brain, mostly in the upper front, to the side sometimes. It was quite exciting to discover how these things were growing. But for some reason, shortly after the pandemic began, maybe it was because of anxiety, I have no idea, suddenly I developed what they call tinnitus. Probably harsh. Some of your audience experiences tinnitus. Tinnitus is, suddenly I heard thousands of these sounds, like a whole spectrum of frequencies in my brain area. actually in my ear area, because they relate tinnitus to the ear, to the auditory canal, but it was deeper than that. The tinnitus seemed to be all over my brain, and at first I was a little claustrophobic because I couldn't shut it off at night. Mm-hmm. When I was in the dark in the silence trying to fall asleep, I would hear this almost like a waterfall of high-pitched frequencies, and I was both dismayed and excited because I kind of wanted to shut them off, but I didn't know how. And so I experienced a couple of months of insomnia, I have to say, and I read a lot of things online about it. Of course, medical science think it's a disease, Oh, it's a disease. How do we stop it? How do we get rid of it? But, ultimately I came to think that it's not necessarily a disease. It could be an evolutionary step where I've heard that 40% of Americans experience tinnitus at some point in their life, and some of them have it full time and listen to it, but they almost universally try to get rid of it. But I thought, what if I just go with it and listen to it and learn to enjoy it somehow? And that's what I've done. I discovered when I listened to the sounds during meditation, which I had listened anyway to the single sounds, suddenly I had like a symphony of sounds going in my brain area. And I discovered by focusing on some of the other chakra areas, like the throat and the heart and your abdomen, there were like almost a different set of tinnitus frequency sounds. So I still don't know what biology is trying to do with me, but it is a very rich experience during meditation. I feel connected to something. I don't know what, but the sounds are really important. So what I would like to do, and actually I got flamed a little bit by going to a tinnitus discussion site on the web, and I said, well, what if this isn't a bad thing? Maybe it's not a disease. Maybe it's, people who are spiritual, opening to the spirit, are starting to hear a lot more sounds. Boy, most people didn't like that. They told me to shut up and get off the list.
Well, we do know, as singers, we know that inside every tone, we have layers of overtones. So the first one would be the unity consciousness, or diversity and unity, the octave, right? And then you talk also about in your book, you talk about a lot of the triad mind or the trinity in religions. And if you divide a string, of course, into three parts, and you play 2/3, you'd have the fifth, which is the next overtone. And so it can be, that is just my spontaneous thought, that all of these tones are actually overtones. So the question would be, what is the root? What is what is, when you go into the hara area, or is there a grounding? Is there a root to these tones? Because within every tone you have multiple overtones. And so if you can understand if there's a harmonics behind it, which it would mean that it's not dissonant, it would be in resonance, then that would be a fascinating exploration to say, okay, is that a third and a fifth, and is there a root that I can sing, or can I feed my body with a certain root frequency that would organize, again, these tones to come into alignment and then come back together into that deeper tone?
Yes, indeed. In fact, it has to do also, I believe, with dimensions. Right. The other dimensions that I talked about with string theory, the implicate order that David Bohm talked about, these dimensions are subquantum. When I say subquantum, they're very small. Mm-hmm. So higher frequencies correlate with smaller dimensions. The wavelength, a frequency has two components. It's the number of cycles per second as something spinning. You can think of it as spinning. But as they get smaller, as the wavelength gets smaller, the frequency gets higher. So for sound, the higher the sound pitch, the smaller the frequency, the smaller the vibration. The larger ones are bass, in our in our electrical circuits we have 60 hertz, 60 cycles per second, and that's like a really bass note, really deep. But as you go out to higher frequencies, you get smaller and smaller. Now, David Bohm thought that the source of consciousness actually is in the implicate order at subquantum dimensions, at the highest frequency. So the highest frequency that you could have in space and time would be down at what's called the Planck length. I describe it in my book. Also, my previous book was much more dealing with science directly. It's called The Electromagnetic Brain, and it didn't really talk much about meditation, but it was dealing with consciousness and the physics of the psychophysics of the brain. The higher frequencies can contain more information. In other words, a smoke signal, we used to say the Native Americans had smoke signals. Mm-hmm. Well, they didn't contain a lot of information because, one cloud of puffs, you couldn't hold a whole lot. Same with our computers. We want higher frequency, faster computers. That's why these chips are getting smaller and smaller, because you need smaller chips to deal with higher frequencies. And the higher frequencies can handle more information. So the highest overtones can be modulated with the most information. You can transfer at a much higher bit rate, for instance. Well, the highest one thing to really understand is that space is not continuous. Space has a limit. It goes down to what's called the Planck length at 10 to the minus 35 meters. Below that, there is no space or time. So the dimension of the Planck length would be the very highest frequency possible, and that is down at the speed of light. So light emanates from the highest frequency of light has a wavelength of 10 to the minus 35 meters. Below that, according to David Bohm, below that is the source of everything. It are the other 7 dimensions that are outside of space and time, and you can think that they're an eternity in a way, because eternity just doesn't. It's there all the time, but there's no time. It's a kind of a paradox, and it's hard to think about even, because it's a timeless, spaceless place in which everything is touching. So if, for instance, when we die, our information of our consciousness has been absorbed into the implicate order, then it's superimposed, it's in contact with every other consciousness that ever existed or exists, that all the information is not lost. In fact, some of the physicists have said that as information flows into a black hole, a micro black hole, it's lost. Well, the information is not lost, it's only lost to space and time. So, for instance, when we die, our information is lost maybe because it stops being generated, but it's slowed down at very high frequencies into the implicate order. And there it meets all the other frequencies that were ever absorbed in the past of time, of course. And so that is what maybe some religions call heaven. That's what Steiner would call the higher worlds. He talked much about communicating with the higher worlds. And through meditation, maybe you're like Alice in Wonderland. If you're shrinking your consciousness down, you know how I've been watching the Olympics and these ice skaters. When the ice skaters start twirling around, if they pull their arms inward toward themselves, and that makes them spin faster. So by getting smaller, they spin faster. And so these smaller, faster, higher frequencies contain much more information until at some point they merge into these micro black holes that are have a diameter of the Planck length, the limit of space, 10 to the minus 35 meters.
Shelli, I have Shelli, I have to stop you because we're coming to the end of the show, and I find that a very beautiful image, whirled and whirling. These beautiful ice skaters pulling their arms in. You are a fascinating soul. I'm going to end the show with this beautiful quote from your book. It's from the Japa Sutram, The Science of Creative Sound. It says, everything vibrates. The resting atom has within it the perpetually vibrating atomic solar systems. It is emanating cosmic radiations all the time. Sound is deathless. It is preserved forever in the matrix. I thank you so much for being on the show on Voice Rising. I wish you much success and continue to bring your amazingness out into this world so that we can interconnect all these many systems like any great psychonaut would do.
Well, thank you, and my love to everyone on this Valentine's Day. Let's hope the world gets a little better. I hope it's reached the bottom and is going back up. That's my prayer.
We are spinning. We're spinning in space. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.